The road was empty that night, a long, dark stretch of wet asphalt shining under the rain, and the small town of Redridge slept quietly behind the hills, only a few scattered lights blinking through the mist. A lonely car moved slowly toward the edge of town, its headlights cutting through the fog like tired eyes searching for something unseen. Behind the wheel sat Detective Lena Hart, her face half hidden under the hood of her coat, her eyes focused and calm, though deep inside her chest a quiet storm was building. She had driven for 6 hours chasing a report that made no sense. An old factory shut down years ago, now suddenly guarded again. No workers listed, no records of ownership. No explanation from local police, only silence and one strange message left at the station. 3 words scribbled in red ink across a blank envelope. Help them please, and nothing more, no name, no address, no signature. Only that as Lena reached the factory gate, she slowed the car. The place looked lifeless at first. Tall metal fences, broken windows, a sagging sign that once said Redridge Steel Plant, now covered with rust and vines. But then she noticed the lights dim but alive, glowing from inside the building like faint pulses of something trying to breathe again. And that was when 2 guards stepped out of the shadows. They were tall, both wearing black raincoats, faces blank, boots splashing in the puddles as they approached. One held a flashlight, the other a small radio clipped to his belt. And when Lena lowered her window, he raised his hand quickly, his voice firm but strangely emotionless. "Sorry, ma'am, this area's restricted," he said. The rain dripping from his hat, the beam of his light shining into her car. Lena looked up at him, not angry, not surprised, just curious. Her voice calm as she asked, "Restricted to who?" But the guard didn't answer. He only glanced at his partner, who spoke in a low tone into the radio, whispering something Lena couldn't catch. Then he turned back, his hand moving slightly toward the gun on his hip, a warning more than a threat. The wind picked up, the gate creaked, and the heavy metal chains rattled against the fence. Lena took a deep breath, stepped out of the car, and the rain hit her face like a curtain of cold needles. She stood straight, her coat collar pulled high, her boots sinking slightly into the mud. "I'm with the Bureau," she said quietly, her voice barely above the sound of the rain. The first guard frowned. "There's been no notice of any Bureau visit," he said, his tone flat, his eyes sharp, but Lena didn't blink. She simply reached into her coat, slow and steady, and when her hand came out, it held a silver badge glinting under the beam of the flashlight, the metal reflecting the falling rain like tiny sparks of fire. She raised it just enough for both guards to see. The one with the radio took a step back. The other swallowed hard, the tension in the air thick enough to taste. "Detective Lena Hart, Special Investigation," she said, her eyes never leaving theirs. "Now either tell me who sent you here, or move aside." For a moment no one spoke. The rain filled the silence, loud and endless. Then the first guard sighed and looked away, muttering something under his breath before signaling to his partner. The chain around the gate loosened. The lock clicked open, and the gate slowly slid aside with a deep groan that echoed through the empty field like an old warning that no one wanted to hear again. Lena nodded once. Calm but alert, she stepped through the gate, the guard staying behind, their eyes following her every move, as if afraid she might not come back. The ground inside was uneven, covered with puddles and old debris. Her flashlight beam danced across walls painted with peeling red letters and faded safety signs. Everything smelled of oil, rust, and forgotten time. Somewhere far inside the building, a faint sound rose, a metallic clang followed by another, rhythmic and slow, like something or someone moving deep in the dark. Lena's hand instinctively brushed the side of her holster, her breath slow, her mind focused. She felt the chill in her bones, not from the cold, but from the quiet knowledge that she wasn't alone in this place. A shadow passed by a window above her. Quick and silent, she looked up but saw nothing, only the reflection of her own light against broken glass. And yet she felt it again, that presence, that weight in the air, like being watched by eyes she couldn't see. She stopped near an old loading dock, water dripping from the ceiling, and noticed something strange. Fresh tire marks on the ground, still wet, leading deeper into the factory. She crouched down, touched the edge of the print, and her fingers came away black, smelling of gasoline, too fresh for an abandoned site. Someone had been here recently, very recently. She straightened, scanning the walls, and there she saw it. A small red light blinking near a corner. A security camera, new and clean, still working. Her heart quickened. The factory wasn't abandoned. It was active. Someone had turned this dead place alive again. But for what purpose, she didn't know. The wind howled outside, shaking loose metal sheets and sending echoes through the hallways. And in that eerie noise, Lena heard something faint but clear. A voice distant and hollow. Calling her name, Detective Hart, it said. Slow, calm, familiar yet impossible. She froze. Her breath caught halfway, her pulse loud in her ears, because no one here should have known her name. She raised her light, aimed it down the hall, the beam trembling slightly as her hand tensed. The darkness ahead seemed endless, and for the first time that night, she felt something she rarely did. Fear, not for herself, but for what she might find if she kept going. Still, she whispered softly to the empty air, "I'm coming anyway," and stepped forward into the dark. The sound of rain faded as Detective Lena Hart stepped deeper into the factory, her boots echoing softly against the cold, wet floor. The beam of her flashlight moved across the walls, lighting up old posters that warned of danger, rusted pipes that hissed faintly, and shadows that danced with every small movement she made. The air inside felt thick and heavy, almost like it was hiding something, a secret that had been sleeping for too long and didn't want to wake up behind her. The gates clanged shut, the sound sharp and final. The guards were gone, and the only thing left was the wind sneaking through the cracks, whispering across the metal walls like voices that never left. Lena paused for a moment, listening carefully, every sense awake, every muscle tight, the smell of oil and dust mixing with the dampness of rain that drifted in through broken windows. She remembered the note from the station again, the red ink, the shaky handwriting. "Help them, please," it kept repeating in her head, and she wondered who had sent it, what had happened here, and why no one in town wanted to talk about this place. It was as if the whole town had erased the factory from memory, pretending it never existed, but someone knew she would come. Someone wanted her here. The flashlight flickered once, then steadied again. She passed a long corridor filled with old lockers. Half open, their doors creaking. Inside were old work boots, torn uniforms, empty lunch tins, all frozen in time, as if everyone had left in a hurry. No goodbyes, no packing, just vanished. She found a small photo lying on the ground. Covered in dust, she wiped it clean with her thumb. It showed a group of workers smiling outside the factory gates, sunlight on their faces. Behind them, the same metal walls that now looked like a grave. She turned the photo around and saw something written on the back. Shift 9A, the day before. Lena frowned. The day before what? She thought, but before she could think more, a sudden noise echoed from somewhere above, a clank, then another, slow and uneven. Like footsteps on a metal walkway, she looked up, the flashlight catching the edge of the railing, but nothing was there. Only darkness and dust swirling in the beam of light. Her heart began to race, not with fear, but with that sharp rush of curiosity that always came before the truth. She moved toward the stairs leading up, careful with each step. The metal groaned under her weight. When she reached the top, she found a row of offices with glass walls, most of them shattered, papers scattered everywhere, chairs overturned, drawers open. She walked slowly, scanning the floor, and then she saw something that didn't belong: fresh footprints. Small, light, and too clean for this place. Someone had been here not long ago. Maybe minutes, maybe less. She crouched down, her fingers brushing against the floor. The prints led toward a door marked "Control Room." The letters faded but still readable. She followed the trail, her hand ready on her gun, her breath calm but steady. The air colder now, carrying a faint hum of electricity. The sound of something still alive in this dead building. When she reached the door, she noticed it was slightly open, a thin line of yellow light spilling through the crack. She pushed gently, the door creaked. Inside she saw screens glowing dimly, some static, some showing camera feeds from around the building. And in the middle of the room sat a man, his back to her, hunched over a console, typing slowly, whispering under his breath. Lena took one step forward. The floor creaked. The man froze. His hand stopped and his head turned slightly, just enough for her to see his reflection on one of the screens. Pale skin, tired eyes, a small scar near his neck. He looked more frightened than dangerous. Before she could speak, he whispered softly, "You shouldn't be here, detective." Her heart skipped. "How do you know my name?" she asked, her voice low. The man smiled sadly. "Because they told me you'd come," he said, his tone quiet but certain. She took another step closer. The light flickering over his face, he looked weak, maybe sick, maybe just scared. "Who told you?" she asked again. But the man didn't answer. Instead, he pointed at one of the monitors. Lena turned to look. The screen showed a dark hallway, empty, yet on the corner of the image a red light blinked slowly. The camera moved by itself, turning toward the very room they were in. The screen now showing Lena and the man standing there, the lens zooming slightly. As if watching them, she felt a chill crawl up her spine. Someone was on the other side, controlling it, seeing everything. The man stood, trembling. "They never shut this place down," he whispered. "They just changed what they were making." Lena frowned. "What do you mean?" she asked, but he was already stepping back, shaking his head, his eyes filled with fear. "You don't want to see it. Not like I did," he said, his voice breaking. "It's still here, under the floor." Before Lena could question him again, the lights in the room blinked once, twice, then went out completely. Darkness swallowed them. She reached for her flashlight, flicked it on, but the man was gone, vanished without sound. The only thing left was the faint glow from one screen that had stayed on, showing the hallway outside, and in that grainy image, she saw a shape moving toward the room, slow and steady, like it already knew exactly where she was. Her grip tightened on her flashlight, her other hand near her weapon. The air seemed to hold its breath. Even the rain outside had gone quiet. She took one careful step back, her heartbeat loud enough to feel. The shadow grew larger on the screen, closer, clearer, until it stopped right in front of the door. The handle began to turn, slow and silent, and Lena whispered to herself, "Whoever you are, I'm ready." Even though deep inside she wasn't sure she was. The door handle turned slowly, each creak echoing through the silent control room. And Detective Lena Hart stood frozen, her flashlight, beam steady but her heart racing faster with every quiet sound. She watched the shadow under the door grow longer, stretching like a dark hand reaching for her. The air felt colder now, the hum of electricity gone, replaced by the faint whisper of the wind crawling through the cracks in the wall. The door opened just enough for a figure to step through, tall and thin, wearing a long coat that dripped with rain. The man stopped at the threshold, his face hidden under the brim of his hat, his voice low and strained as he said, "Put the light down, detective. You don't want them to see where you are." His tone wasn't threatening, it was warning, filled with something that sounded almost like fear. Lena didn't lower her flashlight right away. Her instincts told her to stay cautious. But there was something in his voice that made her pause, something real, something human. She finally tilted the beam toward the floor, the light sliding over the man's boots and up the edge of his coat. They were soaked, dirty, torn at the seams, like he had been running or hiding for days. She took a small step closer and asked softly, "Who are you?" The man raised his hand slowly, showing he carried no weapon. "My name's Carter," he said, his voice trembling slightly. "I used to work here before they closed everything down." His eyes darted toward the blinking red light on the wall, the same camera that had been watching her earlier. "They're still watching, you need to move," he added in a whisper. Glancing nervously at the ceiling, Lena's pulse steadied. She had heard this kind of fear before, the kind that came from people who had seen something too big to explain. "Who's watching, Carter?" she asked, her voice calm, but the man shook his head. "You don't understand, they never stopped the project, they just moved it underground," he said, his hands trembling. "That's where the missing people went. The ones you're looking for, they're all down there." A chill ran down Lena's spine. She wanted to ask more, but Carter suddenly froze, his eyes wide as he looked toward the corner of the room. Lena turned and saw the same camera move again, shifting slightly, the red light blinking faster. Someone somewhere was controlling it. Watching every move they made, Carter took a step back, whispering, "We have to go now before the next sweep." And without waiting for her answer, he ran toward the hallway. Lena followed quickly, her flashlight bouncing against the walls, casting long, uneven shadows that looked alive. They moved down a narrow passage lined with pipes and cables, the air thick with dust and the smell of rust. Every sound seemed louder than it should be. The drip of water, the clang of their boots, the distant hum of machinery that shouldn't have been running anymore. Lena could feel her throat tighten. This place was alive in ways it shouldn't be. They turned a corner and entered a larger space. An old production floor filled with silent machines, belts covered in grime and signs of recent activity. Coffee cups half full, footprints in the dust, and faint marks on the floor as if heavy boxes had been dragged across. Carter stopped near a metal pillar, his voice shaking. They use this floor at night. When no one in town is awake, they bring people here in trucks. Lena's eyes scanned the room, her gut telling her that he wasn't lying. There was too much evidence of movement, too much order in the chaos. Why would they do that? She asked quietly, and Carter looked at her with eyes that carried too much sorrow. Because they were testing something not human, he whispered, his hand gripping the pillar so tightly his knuckles turned white. I saw it once. It moved like a person, but it wasn't one. The wind howled through a broken vent, sending loose papers swirling across the floor. Lena knelt to pick one up. It was a lab report. The ink faded, but readable. It mentioned, Subject 14B, unstable behavior, containment required. Her stomach tightened. She glanced up at Carter. What were they making, she asked, but before he could answer, the sound of metal scraping against metal echoed through the darkness, followed by slow, heavy footsteps coming from the far end of the hall. Carter's face drained of color. It's them, he whispered. We have to hide. He grabbed her hand and pulled her behind a large machine, both crouching low as the footsteps grew louder, closer, rhythmic like the beat of a heart. Lena switched off her flashlight. Holding her breath, the sound of footsteps stopped just a few feet away and a faint mechanical whine filled the air, like gears turning inside a hollow chest. Through the gap between the pipes, Lena saw a tall shape move past, wearing a dark suit, its movements too smooth, too precise, its head turning slowly from side to side as if scanning the room. And then she noticed its face, or what should have been one. It was covered by a smooth, reflective mask with no mouth or eyes, only a faint glow beneath the surface. Carter squeezed her arm tightly, silently pleading for her not to move. After a few endless moments, the figure turned and walked away, disappearing into the corridor beyond. Lena exhaled quietly, her breath shaking. Carter whispered, They call them handlers. They're not people anymore. They do whatever the system tells them. She stared at him, her mind trying to piece together everything she had seen tonight. The guards, the cameras, the underground lab, the missing people, and now these machines that looked human but weren't. She finally whispered, You said the people are underground. How do we get there? Carter hesitated, glancing toward a large metal door at the end of the hall, its surface covered in rust and deep scratches. That's where it starts, he said softly. But once we go down, there's no coming back. Lena stood slowly, determination burning in her eyes. Then let's find out what they're hiding, she said, her voice steady despite the fear curling in her chest. The rain outside thundered against the roof. The power flickered for a brief second, and somewhere deep below them a low rumble rose from the ground like something waking up after a long sleep. Lena looked toward the door, her hand brushing against her badge. The same badge that got her through the gate, the same one that now felt useless against whatever waited below. She took one last breath, nodded to Carter, and together they stepped toward the darkness beyond the door, unaware that someone was already waiting for them on the other side. The metal door loomed ahead, wide and tall, its surface eaten by rust and time, faint streaks of red running down like old blood washed away by rain. Detective Lena Hart stood before it, the beam of her flashlight shaking slightly in her hand, the air around her thick with a low hum that seemed to come from somewhere deep behind the walls. Carter stood beside her, his breathing fast and shallow, his eyes fixed on the ground as if afraid to look at the door for too long. Lena reached out and ran her fingers over the cold metal, the texture rough and uneven. She could feel faint vibrations under the surface, like machinery moving far below. She whispered quietly, What's down there? And Carter swallowed hard before answering. They said it was research. They said it was for protection. But when the screams started, I knew it wasn't science anymore. His voice cracked with the weight of memories he had tried to bury. A single chain held the door shut, secured with a heavy lock that looked newer than everything else around it, shiny and strong. Lena leaned closer, the faint scent of oil and fresh metal rising from it. Someone's been maintaining this, she said softly, more to herself than to Carter, and he nodded slowly. They come here at night. The trucks stop outside, men in black coats unload crates, and the lights below turn on again, he whispered, his voice trembling as if even speaking the truth was dangerous. The rain outside had slowed, leaving behind only the steady drip of water leaking through cracks above. Each drop landing with a hollow echo that filled the silence. Lena pulled a small tool from her pocket, crouched by the lock, and began working quietly, the soft clicks of metal against metal mixing with the distant sound of thunder rolling over the hills. Carter shifted nervously, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds, his fingers twitching against his coat. Finally, the lock gave a faint snap. The chain slid loose and the door creaked open just an inch. A rush of cold air spilled out, carrying with it the faint smell of something chemical, sharp and unpleasant. Lena pushed the door wider, the hinges moaning under the weight, and a stairway appeared, leading downward into total darkness. The steps made of old iron, slick with moisture, the air growing colder with every breath. She turned to Carter, her eyes steady. "You don't have to come with me," she said. But he shook his head, fear and determination mixed in his gaze. "If I don't go now, I'll never leave this place," he replied. His voice trembling but firm, Lena nodded once, then stepped onto the first stair, the sound of her boot echoing faintly. One step at a time they descended, the darkness swallowing them completely until the light from above vanished behind the door. The deeper they went, the louder the humming became. It wasn't just sound anymore, it was vibration, pulsing through the metal rails, through the floor, through their bones. Lena's flashlight flickered, then steadied again, revealing walls lined with pipes and wires, some still humming faintly with power. Symbols painted in red along the walls, strange markings that looked half human, half something else entirely, Carter whispered. "They said the project was shut down years ago," and Lena replied softly. "Looks like they lied." At the bottom of the stairs they reached a narrow corridor, the ceiling low, the floor covered in a thin layer of water that reflected their light like a mirror. They followed the path until it opened into a wide chamber filled with machines. Large glass cylinders stood against the walls, each filled with murky liquid, tubes running in and out like veins. And inside the nearest one, Lena saw something that made her breath stop. A shape floating just below the surface, human but not quite, its skin pale and stretched, its eyes closed, its chest moving slowly as if breathing underwater. Carter stumbled backward, his voice breaking. "That was one of them. One of the workers. I saw her face before. She disappeared 2 years ago." Lena stepped closer, the light trembling on the glass. The label on the side read Subject 9B. "Active," she whispered to herself. "They kept them alive." Her voice a mix of horror and disbelief. The sound of machinery buzzed faintly in the background, the tubes pulsating in rhythm with the slow breathing of whatever was inside. Then a voice echoed from behind them, calm and smooth. "You shouldn't have come here, Detective." Lena spun around, her flashlight catching the edge of a metal door sliding open. A tall man stepped through wearing a black uniform, his face half hidden behind a visor. He carried a small tablet glowing with data. "This area's restricted even for you," he said. His tone steady, almost polite. Lena raised her badge instinctively, her voice sharp. "Detective Lena Hart, Bureau Investigation. You're going to tell me exactly what this place is." The man smiled faintly, a gesture that didn't reach his eyes. "You already know what it is. You just don't understand why it exists," he replied, taking slow steps toward her. "You came here looking for missing people. But what if I told you they're not missing? They're evolving." Lena frowned, her hand moving slightly toward her weapon. "You're experimenting on humans," she said, her voice cold. The man shook his head slowly. "Not experimenting, improving." Carter stepped forward, his voice rising with anger. "You call this improving?" "They're suffering," he shouted, and the man's calm expression faltered for just a second, then returned. "Suffering is temporary. Progress is permanent," he said, his tone mechanical, like he was repeating something he had been told to believe. Lena took another step closer, her light shining on his visor, and for a brief second she saw her own reflection staring back, pale and tense. And behind her in the reflection she saw movement inside the tanks. The shapes shifting, opening their eyes. A faint hiss filled the room, the machines coming to life one by one, the humming turning into a deep, vibrating roar, lights flashing red across the ceiling. The man stepped backward, his voice calm but urgent. "You shouldn't have opened the door, now it's awake." Lena turned. The glass in the nearest tank cracked slightly, a web of fractures spreading across its surface. The liquid inside bubbling violently, Carter shouted, "Run!" But the door they came through slammed shut with a heavy clang, locking them in. The air filled with the sound of alarms, the hiss of steam, and the pounding of her own heartbeat. Lena gritted her teeth, staring at the tanks as the first one shattered. The liquid spilling across the floor, and from within the glass and wires something began to crawl out, something that once might have been human but no longer was. And in that moment Lena realized the truth. This place wasn't just a lab, it was a prison, and the prisoners were finally waking up. The first tank shattered with a sound like thunder, glass flying across the floor in glittering pieces, the thick liquid spilling out and crawling toward Lena's boots. The creature inside slid free, its movement slow and strange, its skin pale as wax, its eyes wide and empty. Carter stumbled backward, his voice breaking as he whispered, "That's not possible. She was human. She was alive." But Lena already knew there was no saving whoever or whatever that was now. The man in the black visor took a step back, tapping the tablet in his hand. Alarms screamed through the underground chamber, red lights spinning across the ceiling. The other tanks began to vibrate, cracks spreading like spiderwebs. Lena aimed her flashlight toward the man, her voice sharp and shaking. "Shut it down. Now." But he only smiled faintly, the kind of smile that belonged to someone who believed he was right. "It's too late," he said softly. "The system's awake. And it recognizes you." The ground trembled beneath their feet, the sound of machinery roaring to life, gears turning somewhere in the darkness beyond the walls. Carter grabbed Lena's arm, pulling her toward the corridor. "We have to go now," he said, but before they could reach the stairs, the metal door at the far end slid open, and more figures stepped out, not guards, not people, something in between, tall and stiff, their faces covered in smooth black masks, their movements perfectly timed, like machines pretending to be men. Lena fired a warning shot into the ceiling, the sound echoing through the chamber. "Stay back!" she shouted, but the figures didn't flinch. They kept moving forward, silent and calm. Carter pulled her behind one of the broken tanks, whispering urgently, "They're called handlers. They control the subjects, they follow orders without question." Lena took a deep breath, her mind racing. "Then who's giving the orders?" she asked. And before Carter could answer, a voice came through the speakers above them. Deep and familiar. "I am." Lena froze. Her heart skipping, she knew that voice. She hadn't heard it in years, but it had once been the only voice she trusted. She turned slowly toward the source, her voice trembling. "Morris," she whispered. "You're supposed to be dead," the voice laughed softly, calm and steady. "Dead is such a simple word, Lena. I prefer the term reborn." The sound of his voice filled the room, echoing through the walls like a ghost that had learned how to speak again. Lena clenched her fists. "You betrayed the Bureau. You disappeared during the Redridge case. You started this," she said, her anger cutting through the fear. The speakers hissed, and Morris's voice came again. "I started nothing, Lena. I only finished what they began. This is the next step, the next form of humanity. No disease, no weakness, no emotion, only purpose." Carter shook his head violently. "You're insane. They're not people anymore. They're empty," he shouted toward the ceiling. But the voice only replied, "Empty is peaceful, Carter. You of all people should know that." Lena turned to him sharply. "What does he mean?" And Carter's eyes dropped to the floor, his hands trembling. "I was part of it once. I helped build the system, but I didn't know what it would become. I didn't know they'd use real people." Lena stared at him, her trust shaken, but there was no time for anger. One of the handlers moved closer, its hand reaching out, the metal of its fingers glinting in the red light. Lena swung her flashlight and struck its head. Sparks flew and it staggered backward, a faint mechanical whine leaking from its chest. Carter grabbed a metal pipe and slammed it against another one, the sound echoing like thunder. The machine stumbled but didn't fall, more of them appearing from the shadows, moving in perfect rhythm like a single mind controlling them all. They ran, boots splashing through the cold liquid covering the floor, the air thick with the smell of burning wires and chemicals. Lena's lungs burned. The stairway ahead glowing faintly under the flashing red lights behind them. The voice spoke again, calm and confident. "You can't escape. Lena, you belong here. You were chosen long before you knew it." She ignored the words, pushing forward, each step heavier than the last. Carter close behind, his breathing ragged. They reached the stairs, but before they could climb, the metal above them shook, dust falling like snow. The door at the top slammed shut automatically. Locking with a metallic clang, Carter cursed under his breath. "We're trapped." Lena looked around, her eyes scanning the walls for another way. That's when she noticed a narrow vent near the corner, half hidden behind a collapsed cabinet. She rushed to it, kicked the metal grate loose, and crawled inside, the space tight and dark. The sound of pursuit echoing behind them. The tunnel twisted sharply downward. The air colder and thinner, Carter followed behind her. His voice barely a whisper. "Do you think he can see us?" And Lena replied quietly, "He's watching everything, but he doesn't know where this leads. We'll make him regret ever building this place." They crawled for what felt like forever until the vent opened into another chamber, smaller and quieter, filled with old computers and shelves of files covered in dust. Lena pulled herself out first, coughing, her light sweeping across the room. Then she saw something that made her freeze. A wall of photographs pinned up, faces of men, women, and children, all labeled with numbers, and near the top one photo stood out, her brother's face staring back at her, smiling. The label beneath reading Subject 1A, Primary Prototype. Her heart stopped, her knees weak. Carter stepped closer, his voice shaking. "That's your brother, isn't it?" She nodded slowly, her hands trembling. "He disappeared when I was 18, they said he drowned." Tears filled her eyes, anger and grief mixing in her chest. "Morris took him, didn't he?" she said, her voice trembling with fury. The speakers in the corner crackled, and the same calm voice replied, "He was the first success, Lena. The reason this place exists. The reason you're here." She looked up toward the ceiling, her voice filled with pain. "You turned him into this," and the voice answered simply, "No, detective. He turned himself." The lights flickered once, twice. Then the screens on the old computers came alive, showing a video feed of the lab they had just escaped. The broken tanks, the empty hall, and then, from the darkness, her brother stepped into view, alive but changed, his eyes glowing faintly, his skin pale and marked with lines of silver. He looked straight into the camera, straight at her, and said softly, "Lena, come back. It's time to finish what we started." Lena stood frozen, her heart pounding like thunder in her chest. She didn't know if she was looking at her brother or at something that only wore his face. But she knew one thing for certain. Whatever truth waited ahead, it was far worse than anything she had imagined, and now there was no turning back.